All right, so far in this textbook, we have covered chapters 1 through 5. So it would naturally make sense, and that's what we will do, but not right now. Go over chapters 6 and 7. Now, in my humble opinion, for whatever it is or is not worth, you're going to find chapter 6 harder than anything you've ever done. So if you say, well, geez, that other stuff's been hard. No, it's nothing compared to this. All right? So what I'm going to recommend that you do, and I realize time is at a premium for all of us, but tomorrow morning I'm going to go over chapter 6. So what I would like you to do is to go out to W3 Schools, and I will give you the URL right now. I'd like you to go out here between now and tomorrow morning. Again, you don't need the https://www. If you just go out to here, that should do it. It is an online tutorial that discusses using JavaScript the HTML DOM, or document object model. What the DOM does, more than anything else that we've done thus far, is it really allows you to use interactivity on a web page. You can write stuff anywhere you want on a web page. You can change stuff that's on a current web page. You can remove stuff that's on a current web page. All right. In fact, next semester, probably about this time, we'll be in the C# class, and we'll also be talking about databases. And at that time, you're going to hear this term, CRUD. Well, CRUD is an acronym that stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete. Now, we're going to look at CRUD next semester in terms of databases. But what I'm telling you is when you use the DOM, you can use it and do CRUD operations on a web page. There is actually nothing that I can think of when it comes to web programming that is more powerful than being able to do this. It is a hard concept to master. Every time I teach this, I learn something. Or there's something I thought, wow, I thought that worked this way, and it doesn't. All right? So if you look up on the screen here, this is the tutorial. It's right along the side here where it says JS HTML DOM. Each one of those things in there is approximately a page, but they go through examples. All right, and I've mentioned this to you before. One thing about W3 Schools that's nice is they highly encourage you to use their examples. All right, so that's basically what we're going to do tomorrow. What I was going to do today, and I changed my mind, but what I was going to do today was I was going to flip these and go over chapter 7 right now and then go over chapter 6 tomorrow. The problem is many of the examples that are shown in chapter 7 use concepts that are defined in chapter 6. And as I went back and was rereading it, I thought, you know what, that's just going to confuse the heck out of you. And that's not my intention. All right, you may not always agree with that, but it really and truly is not my intention. All right? So tomorrow we will go over both chapters 6 and 7. It will probably take most of the period. I'm not sure. Then within the next couple weeks, we've got to go through chapters 8 through 12. In chapters 8 through 12, what you're going to find is a faster, quicker way, for lack of better words, that you could write JavaScript. All right, and that's using jQuery. The people who have created jQuery, they basically, their claim is that it's about a 90% savings in the amount of code you write jQuery versus JavaScript. I don't think that's true, but to say 60 to 70, I think, yeah, pretty much. All right. Once we get done with that stuff, we're going to spend, and we're not doing it justice, we're going to probably spend 2 days on the rest of the book. There will be no tests on that. There will be no homework on that, but I want you to see those concepts. So like a Thursday and a Friday or something like that. We will go over chapters 13, 14, and 15 in one period, then 16, 17, and 18 in the next period. All right? And that's the plan as far as what we're doing. All right. Now, several of you contacted me via email or whatever and said, hey, I'm still having problems understanding this stuff. Okay? I did the test, or I did the best I could do on this test, but I still had some problems with it. All right? So what I am going to do, all right, is I'm going to give you my HTML for the entire test and my CSS for the entire test. And then what I'm going to ask that we do as a class is write the JavaScript that I created for the test as an entire class. Now, I have not looked at any one of your homework or tests from yesterday. I have not looked at anything. So if we go through this and you go, oh my God, I didn't do anything like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing. Right? There's always plenty of ways to do the same thing. You know, they always say, or at least I've heard this, in life you're typically either a dog person or you're a cat person. Okay? I'm a dog person. I don't really like cats, but I don't like to say there's more than one way to skin a cat because to me that's kind of sick. Right? But there is more than one way of doing the same thing. So I'm going to show you what I did. All right. And first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to come up and I'm going to literally run both programs for you. All right. So the first one I think that we were supposed to do was the trip calculator. So again, this is mine. Yours may or may not work the same way. Either way, that's fine. So you come in here. I changed this up a little bit. I decided I didn't want to print all that garbage. So I just printed the miles per gallon, the trip cost, and the cost per mile. A couple of you came up and asked me, you know, can I have a label and then just put something? It doesn't really matter. That's not really that important. What I'm looking for here is, did you understand the logic to make what was supposed to happen, happen? All right? But none of you came up and asked me this. But if you did, I mean, as an example, if you look at my guessing game, I added another button. None of you came up and said, can I do that? Can you? Sure. I don't want 10 buttons on there. But if you wanted to add one, that would be fine. All right. If you're not sure, then just ask. But in the example that we had here, I think it was 200 miles using 8 gallons of gas and a price per gallon of 3. All right? And that's what the results were. Okay? If I come back in here and there's my clear, if I put nothing in there, okay, invalid or out of range input, okay, I can clear that out. And if I put in values that are too big, again, I get invalid or out of range inputs. All right? And we'll take a look at it in just a second. And then, like I said, in here, okay, so generate a new number. I'll guess 50. It was too low. Try again. Reset it. 75. That was too high. Reset it. Try again. 66. That's too high. Okay, and I got it in 5 guesses. And in the same way, if I reset this and say a new number, and I put garbage in here, invalid guess. If I put in a number that's too big, I just kept it at invalid guess. All right, I could have gone and done a little bit more than I did. To be honest with you, I didn't want to spend that much time doing this. All right, so the first thing to ask you about this, and I may have asked it before, but I'm going to ask it again anyway. You have here about 40 lines approximately, okay, of CSS. Do people understand that the way that mine is set up, here's an H1, and underneath that is an H2. So by saying margin left, all I tried to do was instead of butting that up right there, I tried to put it here and here. Does that make sense? Just adding some left margin. Yes? Okay. Label. When you say inline block, the idea behind an inline block is I want the label and the text box to be on the same line. That's what inline block does. Block means keep things together on the same line. All right? I said that the width of each label, so this was going to be 200 pixels, and the text that was in there was going to be aligned to the right. Anything in there that doesn't make sense. All that stuff that I've done, that I explained to you from right there, all of that, that was just done for aesthetic reasons. All right? Okay. Then I'm saying that both for anything that's for a text box and in any kind of a select box, I want the width to be 300 pixels. So again, some more aesthetic stuff. Then for any buttons, I want those buttons to be 150 pixels. Again, that's all aesthetic stuff. All right? Just to try to make it look decent. I'm not even saying good. I'm just saying decent. All right? Well, by default, when you work on this, typically, your buttons are going to be pushed all the way over to the left, too. So by giving a margin left, that pushed them farther over that way. And then finally, the span thing, this, and I probably should have used red, but that said what? Make it red and bold. All right? Then finally, this thing, all it did was, by default, this was butted up right against here. So by putting a couple spaces in there, I just moved it over a little bit. So I'm asking again, is there anything in there, anything that doesn't make sense to anybody? All right. Well, then hearing not, let's go then and take a look at the interface. So this was the miles per gallon trip cost, whatever you want to call it, this was the interface. All right? So let's see. So title, JavaScript, trip cost calculator. So that is this. All right? Style sheet link. H1, well, actually, that's the title right there. H1, JavaScript trip cost calculator, that's there. H2, I used a span there because I wanted this to appear in red. All right. Input fields are mandatory. Okay. And then what do we have? Well, you can look here and you can see. All right. We've got the key thing here, the key takeaway from right here, when we start working on that, I guess I should have moved this over one, but again, that's not that big a thing. But the key takeaway right here, when you start to look at this, is everything that I want to be able to manipulate programmatically must have an ID. That's the key takeaway. All right? And why? Because those are all the things that I'm going to use getElementById for. Now you'll notice when you look at this, it's not responsive. Kind of looks crummy like this. I don't care. That's not what we're talking about in here. All right? So what do we have? Well, you can see we've got three inputs: miles driven, gallons used, and price per gallon. All right? Well, miles, gallons, and PPG. Maybe not the best names, but the names that I used. Just so you know, those names that are in here do not have to be the same names. They do not have to be the same names as what I use in JavaScript land. They don't have to be. They can be, but they don't have to be. All right. So, in other words, this thing that you see right here, these three lines that you see right here are setting up that heading, that text box, and that asterisk. These three right here are setting up that heading, that text box, and that asterisk. Then finally, these three that are right here on top are setting up that heading, that text box, and that asterisk. All right? Then after that, what do we have? We've got two buttons. One that says clear. Notice it's got an ID of clear. And the other one that's got calculate. And it's got an ID of calculate. Now, I don't want to confuse you here, but I did want to mention something to you. Okay? If you notice, when you look at the buttons, for example, and I might have done it in everything, I don't remember, but I've got both an ID and a name, and they're both the same thing. They don't have to be, but they often are. The ID is normally used with what you're doing on the client side with get element by ID. That's normally the way the ID is used. All right? The name is normally used on the server side. So if I was writing PHP code or I was writing ASP.NET code, I'd be working with the name property and not the ID property. All right, but what I'm telling you is quite often you see both of them in there. All right? All right. And then what's left? Well, what's left is this stuff right here. So I've got three text boxes I added. Title, text box disabled, title, text box disabled, title, text box disabled, and then use the JavaScript file. So I'm going to ask this one last time. What I'm going to do is I've got my key, but I'm going to come in here, and what I'm going to do is grab my CSS, and I'm going to grab, well, I'm going to grab these two, and the, I'll make sure it's the right one. Yeah, it is. Okay. I'm going to grab these three things. I'm going to put a new folder in here. And I'm going to paste all that in. All right, but I'm going to grab the JavaScript file that's in there that's called anything with MPG in it. All right, and I'm just going to get rid of it. So right now, if I go back, oh, I brought over the wrong file. But right now, if I go back and I bring up this MPG, I think at least you'll all agree it doesn't do anything. Everybody agree with that? So ideally, you're all able to either key in the code that I have, or, and I know not this second, or use the code that you have. But what we're going to do is we're going to build this, and what my hope is that as we are building this, if you have a question regarding anything, and I mean anything, that you will ask. All right? So I'll go through the first one, which is what we're going to do right now. It's not really a whole lot of code. Enough. All right? And again, I just want to keep trying to emphasize to you, the way I write things is not the only way that it can be written. All right? Okay, so taking it from the top, I'm going to come in here, and I'm just going to start up a brand new file with nothing in it. All right. Now, in the test that I gave you, it did say we were supposed to use this stuff. So I'm going to start with that. Okay. Those were going to be my constants. And I believe that this was called mpg.js. That's what it's going to be called now. So I'm going to save this. All right, in class to mpg.js. All right, so there's the stuff I've got so far. I will ask, but is there anything in those constants that doesn't make sense to anyone? They are just arbitrary values that I selected. Now you might say gas will never be $1 again. Guess what? When I was your age, actually younger, when I was 16, it was a quarter a gallon. All right? So that's the first thing. Now, not that you had to do this, but I'm going to add one more constant in here. And I just called it bad. Why? Because I did. And I put in here invalid out of range input. Why? Because there's several occasions in the program where I put that. So rather than having to type it in every time, I just made a constant. Again, did I have to do it like that? No. Do you all understand that every one of these right here, constants are variables. They are. But they're variables that should not be allowed to change. They should have to remain constant while the program is running. All right? JavaScript rather is a little funky about that, but that's the way it's supposed to be. And that's how it is in most programming languages. The other thing to realize is since all 7 of these things are all defined in here, and they're all defined outside of any code, they're all global to the program. In other words, every part of the program can use them, and I don't have to do anything special to allow them to use them. All right? So, I mean, you don't have to do this, but what am I doing here? I am declaring and initializing program constants. All right? And I can even say global program constants. Okay? I also declared one global program variable. All right? Probably because I was getting lazy by this time. And I just called it valid input. And I set it equal to true. All right? So that's what I did, was I just set those things up like that. Again, what I'm showing you could have been done in multiple ways. This is just the way I chose to do it. All right? Then, when I start actually writing code, the first thing I usually write is that alias function for document.getElementById. All right? And you've seen it, var $equal function ID, and it just says return document.getElementById. All right. Now I'm asking because I don't know. Is there anything that's in here so far that people don't get? Anything? So again, now I'm going to be able to say $sign something instead of having to say document.getElementById something. All right. That's not being lazy. It's just basically, for lack of better words, not wanting to type any more than you have to type. All right. Now, what else is in here? Well, there's going to be I got a main function and a bunch of other stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the bottom more, and I'm going to write the stuff that goes at the bottom. This is the way I do it. This doesn't mean you have to do it this way. All right. So what I'm going to tell it right here is to do what I call register the functions. All right, so that's what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to register these functions. So it's typically done in the window.onload event. So when you call onload, what do you want to do? Well, I want to do three things. Okay. If you remember the way that this thing looks, it's going to have two buttons there. It's going to have a calculate button and it's going to have a clear button. Everybody see that? So what I want to do is I want to tell the system when the calculate button gets clicked, I want to tell it what I want it to do. When the clear button gets clicked, I want to tell it what to do. And I want to tell it when it starts the program to have the cursor in that field right there. Those are the three things that I want to do right here. All right? So how do I do those? Well, the first one is I come in and I say $, and I call the button calculate. That's the ID I gave it. Dot on click. And I set that equal to main. I just wrote a function called main. I've written it in other times that I've called it process entries. The name that you give it is irrelevant. All right. And the other thing I wanted to do was for this clear. All right. When I get to the clear routine and I click that button, I want to call a routine that I just called ClearAll. All right. Again, nothing that real meaningful about that name. Finally, when the program begins running, I want this thing called miles to have the focus. All right. So when you look at these right here, all right, when you look at these three lines of code, see if I can put this up here. What I'm telling it right here, that first line, that calculate on click says, when that button there is clicked, I want to call the main routine. When that button here is clicked, I want to call a routine called ClearAll. And when you start the program, put the cursor in there. Does all that make sense? All right. And I did that first because to me, that's the easiest thing to do. All right. I know the hardest thing to do is what's going to happen when I click the calculate button. I'm going to do that last. Some people choose to do that first. It's just a matter of, what you want to do. All right. So the next thing that I'm going to do in here, and I struggled with this yesterday. All right. I got the program to work, and I got the output to work right most of the time. But it didn't work right all of the time. And I want to show you what I mean a little bit later. All right. So I ended up writing two different functions. Okay. And I'm going to show you what those are right now. I'm going to write them here. All right. So I'm going to write the first one that I just called BlankOutAllFields. Again, people think, why'd you use that name? I don't know. Because I did. Maybe that's a dumb reason, but I did. And what I wanted that function to do, blank out all fields, all right, what I wanted that function to do was to blank out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things. Does that make sense? Come on in.
Got one for shadow?
Yes.
And then 11:30, quarter to 12, you can send them back
Okay.
down.
Okay, why don't you have a seat over there next to Christian? Okay. So what I want to have happen in this thing called blank out all fields is I want these three things and those three things to go blank. Does that make sense? Now, you might say, well, what about these? Well, they're a little bit different case. So I'm going to explain those to you later. All right? Now, the good news is I know what all these things are because I gave them all IDs. All right. So this is called miles. This is called gallons. This is called ppg. All right. And these have names also. This is called mpg. This is called trip cost. And this is called per mile. Those are just arbitrary names that I came up with. So what I want to do in this blank out all fields is I want to set the value for each one of those to double quote to the empty string. Does that make sense? I do want to do just what the thing is called. I want to blank out all of those fields. All right? So it's 6 lines of code. All right, and because I'm a little lazy, all right, so the first one is miles, the next one is gallons, the next one is ppg, the next one is mpg, and then we have trip cost, and we have per mile. Now, one thing to realize when you look at this is called blank out all fields. That's not being called directly from either button. Does that make sense to people? It's going to have to be called from something else. All right? So again, those are the names that I came up with in my code. All right? And what I'm doing right there is I'm blanking out. I've got 3 input fields. They are miles, gallons, and price per gallon. I have 3 output fields. All right, and those 3 output fields are the miles per gallon, the trip cost, and the cost per mile. All right, so I'm blanking out all 6 of those. So I want to go back. Here's the ClearAll. So I'm going to write that next. And like I said, I kind of struggled with this as far as how to write it, what to do with this, etc. This is the way I came up with, and I'm not saying there's not a better way to do it. In fact, I will tell you that virtually every time someone creates something, somebody else can just about always find a better way to do it. All right? So what did I do in here? Well, in this ClearAll thing, the first thing I want to do is I want to call this. I want to tell it to blank out those fields. Do you all understand that when ClearAll gets called, whenever I click the clear button, that is going to have this, which is going to call this, which is going to clear out those 6 fields? Does that make sense to everyone? Yes? All right. Now, the problem is, I'm asking you this question. Could I have come out and also cleared out those fields immediately? Could I have done that? Could I have set those back to asterisk, or could I have set them to nothing? Could I have done that in here? Could I have done that? I'm asking, yes or no? Could I have done that? Yeah, why not? I mean, I could have. The problem is, if I set it back to either an asterisk or to nothing, I might have an error message there that's now gone. I don't want that error message to be gone. All right? So I only want to do that in certain conditions, at certain times, whatever you want to say. Let me put in the 2 or 3 lines of code, and then I'll take your question. All right? So I came through here, and what I did was I called blank out all fields. All right? And then I kept trying to think of different ways to do this. Would this be a good way to do it? Would this be a good way to do it, etc. But this is what I do want to have happen here is when I do click the clear button, I want everything that's here to clear. So I want there to be these things. I need my labels. I need my buttons. But I want there to be nothing in here. I want there to be nothing in here. and I don't want there to be anything in there. So to make it simple, I just came in and I did two things. First, for each one of those, all right, so for each one of them, so it was MPG and gallons and miles, all right, whatever the heck they were all called, okay? Let's see, it was, this is where we come in and we do the dot, next, sibling, dot, first child, dot, node value. All right, so I wanted to come in and I wanted to set that equal to what? An asterisk. Remember, I am clearing everything, so I'm setting it back to its initial values. All right, let me copy this. So I want to do that with MPG. I want to do that with, it's not MPG, I'm sorry, miles, not MPG. I want to do that with miles, and I want to do that with gallons, and I want to do that with PPG. All right? So in English, we've got our program up here. Let's suppose we just ran it, okay? And technically, after we run it and it runs like this and we put in valid stuff, this should, oh, that was nice. That shouldn't be there, that shouldn't be there, and that shouldn't be there. All right? But when I click the clear button, I want this to go away, 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 and those to come back. Does that make sense to everybody? In other words, calling ClearAll is going to set it to the default values it should have when the program begins running. All right? So these 6 lines that you see right here, those lines are going to, let me go away, but those lines are going to get rid of, map them up. Miles, that's going to be that one. All right, gallons, that's going to be that one. PPG, that's going to be that one. All right, MPG, that's going to be this one. Trip cost, that's going to be this one. And per mile, that's going to be this one. Okay? Then up here, this is telling me that I want, this one is saying I want that one. This one is saying I want that one. And this one is saying I want that one. Now, I just made a mess. I understand that. All right? This is the stuff that we will be going over tomorrow. That's why I said, because a couple of you came up during the test and said to me, I can't get that stuff to work right. And I said, if that's the case, just use an alert for that. You didn't have to put in those asterisks. All right? You could have used an alert, which would have been fine. But what this is saying is, this is miles right here. This is miles. So that's this. The next sibling means what comes next. All right? Well, that's this. All right? It's the first child and it's the node value, so it's the contents of what's right there. So that's all we're doing. So in other words, when we call ClearAll, we are trying to set this so that it looks exactly like it does when the program begins running. All right? And that's all fine. Everything worked fine, except it didn't. All right? And I kept thinking, that's why I ended up rewriting this several times. When I say rewriting it, I'm talking about 3 or 4 lines that I ended up rewriting. But I ended up, in the end, coming back here and adding one more line to this routine. All right. And that is, I wanted to make sure that when I started, I assumed my valid input was true. If I didn't do that, let's just put it this way, I didn't get the right results. Yes?
Why do you make two different functions?
The question was, why do you make two different functions? When I first did it, I had one function, and it worked just fine, except what ended up happening was, if I put this stuff inside of here, which is what I think you're saying, that means that if I had any kind of an error message, boom, it was gone. And you might say, well, that's what you'd want, you know, but I only want to do that when I click ClearAll, all right? And that's why I'm forcing it to be this way. And if you say, I still don't understand, look at this. I'm going to call this function, all right? I'm not just going to call this function from ClearAll. I'm going to call it from another place too. And in that case, I don't want those error messages to go away. All right? That's the rationale. Okay? All right. So my question is, I still have some code to write in here. Is there anything that's in here that we've done so far that you don't understand? All right. I'm going to create my variables, and then we'll take a break, and after the break, we'll come back and we will write the code that goes inside of there. All right. So if you notice, when you click the calculate button, I'm calling a function named main. All right. So to me at least, that makes sense to write that now. Okay. And I put in 6 variables. Now, if you look at your handouts, what you're going to find is the names that you have here for the variables are the exact same names that I used in the HTML file. They don't have to be, but most of the time people like to do that because notice miles, so that of course should be gallons. And that one right here should be ppg. All right. These 3 lines right there, these 3 lines, not 4 lines, those 3 lines right there that you see, they're saying take the values in each one of the text boxes, attempt to convert them to a float, and put them into those variables. So when we get done with those 3 lines of code, either those 3 variables will hold numbers, or they'll hold what? What if I put in something invalid? What will they hold? What? Not a number. So they will hold NaN if, for some reason, I put something in there that's invalid. Yes?
Okay, so back in the HTML, when we're defining an input, can't we make it so it only accepts numbers?
You can put a number field in there. You can do that. The problem is, some older browsers don't understand that. Anything pre, like typically IE9 and before, won't understand that. All right, and it's mainly an IE problem. The day is supposed to come when you'll have to do very little of this. All right, but just so you know, even if you set it up as a number, and even if you do all this stuff, basically, quite often what's happening is JavaScript's getting written in the background anyway. So what you're learning is the stuff that's happening in the background.
But wouldn't it like cut out on top of the validating?
It will, yes. Yes, it will cut down validating. Yes. But, and I've used this example before. All right, I was talking to the second-year people about this yesterday. So let's assume you do that. And it works 99.9% of the time. Okay? Now, you come up to that 0.1% where it doesn't work. You get called in by your boss, and you look at him or her, and you smile, and you go, it's not my fault, it's the software's. And your boss is thinking, no, it's not. It's your fault. So what we're doing is we're trying to cover where, if there was any kind of error, we are taking control. When you use all the built-in stuff that's in HTML5, you are losing some control. All right? You can gain some of it back because with some of the functions and the like that you have in there, with some of them, you can actually add things to what HTML gives you. All right? But what we're doing is we're saying we want to be in charge here. Now, I'll take your question in a second. The other thing is these three things that are not in gray, those are these three. So we're going to fill those up later. Does that all make sense? All right. And what I'm trying to tell you is, ideally at least, when I click calculate, I've got values there. Now, is it possible I left them blank? Of course it is. Is it possible I put in something that was either non-numeric or out of range? Of course it is. We're going to handle that later after the break. But what I'm telling you is, I'm assuming that if the person clicked the calculate button, that they put valid values in there. All right? That's what I'm assuming. I still have to code in case they didn't, but that's what I'm assuming. I'm also assuming that there's nothing in here right now. And that's what's going to hold MPG. That's what's going to hold trip cost. That's what's going to hold per mile. Your question.
What does the parse float do?
The parse float just says whatever you put in there, attempt to convert it to a floating point, which is a number which can be a whole number or can have a decimal place in it. It's just like parse int, but it allows for decimals, whereas parse int expects just whole numbers. Any other questions? All right, it is 8:58. Let's please come back at 9:10. All right.